Start again. I call to order the meeting of the Manassas Park Governing Body Work Session for June 9th, 2020. First of all, per the General Assembly's approval of the Governor's amendments to the biennial budget, the governing body may now meet electronically without a quorum actually assembled in a single location and without the in-person governing body members voting on the participation of those who are remoting in. The following benchmarks for the meeting this evening have been met. First, the governor has declared a state of emergency for the current COVID-19 panic in accordance with Code of Virginia. Second, the declared emergency makes it impractical or potentially unsafe for the governing body to assemble in a single location, and guidance from state and federal governments support this determination. Therefore, the governing body will be meeting with various members participating electronically through GoToMeeting. Third, the meeting is to discuss or transact the business statutorily required or necessary to continue operations of the governing body. Fourth, the governing body will make available a recording or transcript of the meeting on its website in accordance with Code of Virginia. Fifth, notice has been and will continue to be provided to the public using available methods. Lastly, we have made and will continue to make arrangements for public access through electronic means, including the ability to comment. Those participating electronically are Councilmember Miriam Machado, Councilmember Hasib Javed, Councilmember Hector Sendejas, and Vice Mayor Preston Banks. Those participating in person are Councilmember Donald Shoemaker, Councilmember Alana Mensing, and Mayor Jeanette Rischel. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay. All opposed? All opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. We have an agenda. One quick announcement prior to the beginning of the work session. One announcement or invitation, and this will be repeated later on in the work session. Residents are invited to participate in a Facebook Live virtual town hall during which you will be able to ask the city manager any questions that are not answered in the work session this evening. This virtual town hall will be tomorrow evening, Wednesday, June 10th at 7 p.m. There are convenient links on the city website, and we'll repeat this through the meeting this evening. So let's get right into the work session. City Manager, do you prefer that we let you go entirely through your presentation, or may we interrupt you?
If you have read the presentation already, and you know what's already been read, and therefore you know if an answer is already going to be provided later on, then yeah, something that you want to ask during the presentation, I think that's fine. If you haven't had time to review the presentation, maybe you want to wait to see if I cover that specific question before I get to it.
Okay.
Does that work?
Okay. Yeah, that works. We'll try to let you go all the way through.
Great. Well, good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of the governing body, and everyone who's on the call. Tonight I'll be going over just an update, mainly an update on kind of changes in public hearing and open meetings, but I will rehash some elements of the actual downtown for viewers at home who may not have been keeping up with everything. I do encourage everyone to go back and watch the prior meetings on YouTube where we discussed this as well. So we've covered a lot of things, a lot of topics, a lot of issues that you don't want to miss out on. So please go back and watch those. But I will repeat some things tonight, but not too much, because I want to make sure we have plenty of time to actually ask questions. When I'm done with this actual presentation and we're done with questions about it, I'll actually open up the agenda packet that has the actual comprehensive agreement for phase 3 and also the purchase and sale agreement for phase 4. So if you have any questions on any specific pages, I can go down to that specific page. So what I will cover today, so I'll go over the updated concept plans for phases 3 and 4. I'll go over the fiscal impact of the development, because that's ultimately one of the major reasons reasons why we're doing this, and also we want to make sure that we're not losing money out of any transaction as well. And then I'll look at the City Hall building and the associated public infrastructure and what the financing mechanism is for that. I'll have to go over some of the highlights for both Phase 3 comprehensive agreement and the Phase 4 sale agreement highlights as well. Let's just go over the elements. So Phases 3 and 4, the concepts. This is a reminder to the public when we're talking about our downtown or our town center or city center as it's been referred to in the past. We're talking about the area. This is the City Hall right here. Let me use your phone here. So this is our current City Hall location, and here's the VRE track. You can see this is Phase 1. The building that was completed in the late 2000s. Phase 2 is ongoing. The first half of which was completed a couple of years ago, and the second half is scheduled to start construction later this calendar year. And then tonight specifically we're talking about both Phases 3 and then Phase 4. And each of the new development proposals have some specific goals that we laid out when we started on this initiative over 2 years ago to fix the downtown. It was clearly an issue with Phase 1, how it was developed, Phase 2 as well. There wasn't a good kind of well thought out plan for how we can achieve commercial success in the downtown. So we spent a lot of time evaluating kind of what the issues were and developing a strategy for addressing those issues. And that's where Phase 3 and Phase 4 came about. For Phase 3, the key goals again was to bring in a commercial anchor that can help drive retailers to this area and customers to this area, which therefore brings in additional retailers and restaurants. Making sure that the VRE is as close as possible to Manassas Drive without taking up valuable real estate on Manassas Drive, so that can support the anchor and all the commercial components of both Phase 1 and Phase 3. Dealing with the City Hall liability, this is our remaining developable land that we own. Our current City Hall is on that land, but it's not a new building. It's an old building that's reaching the end of its life cycle. So this, by tackling this project, we're able to not only complete the actual development of our city center downtown, but we're also able to address this long-term unfunded capital liability, which is the City Hall building. And then making sure that we get our additional retail that Street Sense identified was viable, which is at the Four Corners area right here on the lake. Making sure that we achieve the market supportable amount of retail capacity for the entire town. Phase 4, the primary goal is really addressing the parking issues. Well, Phase 3 fixes the anchor issue and helps out with parking with the garage. The adjacent parking specifically to Phase 1 is going to be, at least for this component of Phase 1, is going to be addressed by the Phase 4 development. Phase 4 also helps clean up an area that also detracts from successful retail development as well. And just as a reminder, the development team, for those who have not listened to the last few meetings, for Phase 3, the developer is Norton Scott, and then they have agreement right now with the builders, Toll Brothers, for the actual residential component, and Norton Scott is the overall developer and plans on keeping the commercial components that are not part of the City Hall building. And then Phase 4 is Oxoy Blue Properties, who are headquartered out in Liberia Avenue. They're a local developer, but they have projects throughout the region. So the updated concept for Phase 3, if you attended the town hall but haven't watched any of the meetings or the public hearings that we did over the last couple of months, this is the updated concept for Phase 3. We'll go over the components of it. So really the first part is what's called Phase 1A. There's a little delay on my laser pointer here, but I'm trying to highlight the areas that make up Phase 1A. And you can see the different components of Phase 1A. You have this green building here, which is what we call the Building A. That is where the City Hall is going to be located. The new City Hall was on ground floor commercial, and a library as well. We also have, which is a standalone pad for retail and restaurants, the public plaza for events and public gathering, and then all the associated infrastructure of what we call the city center area. When you see that reference for phase 3, we're not talking about the original city center. We're talking about the commercial component of our downtown, because all these kind of properties that are fronting the Manassas Drive, but that have the four-corner retail strategy that Street Sense recommended that we maximize. So the commercial component of phase 3, we like to call that the city center component of phase 3. Then you can see the garage right here, the VRE garage, the proposed VRE garage. The hope is to get some additional underground city-owned public parking out of that because of the topography changes from the old location, which was tucked back here, to the new location, which is closer to the commercial. There's some topography there that enables the potential to have some underground city-owned parking. And then for the component of phase 1A, you have your 174 2/2 condos on the brown buildings back here. Once phase 1A is completed and the city moves out of the current city hall site and over to the new building, then the goal is for the commercial building B, what we call the anchor, to be developed. And then the associated residential, that's part of what's called phase 2. That's part of the phase 3 Roman numeral. Here's just a visual for what the would look like if it's completed. You can see across the street the old city center buildings, and then on this side over here, if you look at this building, this is where the current city hall is located. Of course, that would go away. This is the building B, commercial building B, the largest building that's part of this development. We have the building A, the city hall building with ground floor retail, the standalone retail, and then all the associated infrastructure, including the VRE garages.
Can I ask, is building B?
Is your microphone
I'm
on?
sorry, did I say C?
No. I was going to ask you if building B also includes all of the building that goes towards Manassas Drive. Is it kind of like that whole complex?
Yeah, the office, retail, and the anchor business.
What was the question, Ron?
Well, is in the picture we're seeing, and for the public, is that kind of that whole building is building B? It's like the 3-story with the office on top plus the other part that is going towards Manassas Drive. That's like one big building. That's all building B, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
So here's a updated close-up of building A and building C, and if you can see for building A, the reason why I said updated concept is this actually shows a 3-story layout instead of the 4-story, and I'm going to cover that change later on this presentation when I go to the hall specifically. Where you can see kind of the elements of a town center with splash pad and areas for concerts and other things as well. The residential components, if you're not familiar with what 2/2s are, this is what they look like. If you want to get a good example as well, if you go up to the Wegmans on Westfields, there's actual Toll Brothers 2/2s being constructed now. So if we have an example, I would recommend going to see or feel for what the residential component will look like in your city. For phase 4, get on the other side, so if you, this side here is where phase 3 would be. When you cross the street and you're adjacent to the old city center building now called Park 170 at City Center, this is where phase 4 is going to be. The key element again with phase 4 is the 150 parking spaces that we're going to get adjacent to the existing vacant retail, and that's part of the original city center building to help address the retail shortfalls. You can see here from our analysis, this would provide parking to support roughly 28 to 35,000 in retail for restaurants in the old city center development. To acquire all these properties and deal with all the expenses of acquisition of the properties and environmental cleanup in order to actually make it work. These are the residential components, what are called Building A and Building B, or Building 1 and Building 2, sorry, in this layout. They're both multifamily apartments, not 202s, and they have podium parking to make sure that we're maximizing the actual parking in our downtown. And then you have the 100,000 square foot commercial office building that can serve different components that the market will support in the future, especially once the actual anchor is in place in phase 3. And with the current proposal, there's very strong likelihood that we're going to get some additional public parking down here as well, based off of some of the remaining properties that get acquired.
How much, Lazo, how much of that parking is for the 100,000 commercial building, and then how much would be left, would be extra, let's say?
Yes, I don't have those numbers, but it would likely have to be supporting everything, right? So it would be supporting the residential and commercial components for and remember the residential, but I don't have all the parking counts, but everything has to be in compliance when you read the actual agreement with our zoning requirements, but certainly there's going to likely be waivers in place for the apartments, just like expect that for phase 2 as well, to match the reality of the 1.5 ratio versus the 1.75 ratio that we currently have in our zoning ordinance.
Hey, Laszlo, I'd like to address that as well. So if you look at there's going to be additional public parking, so it's not going to be assigned for that. It's going to be for the general downtown area. Those buildings near it, just like any other buildings, can use that parking, but the city will control the public parking components there, as far as whether or not they can stay overnight and such. So certainly, some of the residential units are going to be using the parking overnight. So you can see there. It's hard to see, but there's little red lines in there. Within the red lines, you can see where it says 150 parking spaces, and you have the arrows pointing to the outer edges. That is a public parking area, where Laszlo's pointing. And then down below there, where it says additional public parking. That also has a red line at the top of it. So that's all public parking as well. And then you have a portion of the parking lot is actually going to be set aside for that residential unit on the left side there. The commercial parking would most likely have to use, unless they did some sort of underground parking, it would likely have to use the public parking.
Is there enough parking in front of, I guess it's building 2, on the map it's the one to the left. I'm going to call it building 2, it's the one to the left. Is there enough parking in front of building 2 for building 2?
Yeah, so again, they have to achieve the ratios. Again, we're going to come in with the 1.5 ratio of parking for each unit. You're actually seeing 1.22 ratios, and both are right now, and the Park 170 and City Center, so even the 1.5 is excess parking. So yes, there will be enough.
That one there, building, that building you're talking about, the one on the left there, actually has underground or covered parking. So they're going to have parking underneath the building.
Oh, okay, because just kind of when you look at it, it doesn't look very big. But there's hidden parking and on that site then. Yeah,
you see at the top it says covered parking garage.
Dean, the red line points to both buildings for covered parking, though. Is that what they intended?
No, the red lines point to both of them there to say 395 apartment units.
So it's covered
parking is just on that one on the left.
Just on one building. Thank you.
So you're saying it's going to be underneath,
right,
underground?
Right, yeah.
So a portion though, because
right. It'll be a structured parking facility underneath the apartments themselves.
So fiscal impact. So overall for these 2 projects, what we're looking at is an additional $78 million to $92 million what I'm calling profit for the city, right? And that's direct revenues minus the actual direct cost with the project. You remember from the public hearing, I actually showed the fiscal impact costs. The reason why I removed that is that's more of a planning tool, just to show that from a fiscal impact standpoint, we're able to cover that. And remember, we're more than able to cover that. But the actual money in the hands of the governing body over a 3-year period is the $78 to $92 million. So the best way to think about this is, over the last 2 years, we brought the Artena apartment units online for the city. That was about 100 additional residential units to the city. And since I've been here, that was added. Never in our budget discussions did we say, well, those 100 units cause X fiscal impact, and that means we need to hire, one additional officer or this or that. We never do that type of analysis. The governing body always funds kind of what the priorities are. Not to say that there's not an impact from growing residential, there always is. The impact has far exceeded where we've been because the staffing levels for the city are still below the 2009 levels, and we added a lot more residential units since then. My only point in stating that is the governing body will always have the ultimate decision on where that money goes to fund its priorities. It doesn't follow the exact scientific model of a fiscal impact analysis for where money is going to be directed. So this is the money, the $78 million to $92 million that will be in the hands of this governing body and all future governing bodies out for 3 years to decide how to spend that across all priorities. And that's a very big number. That's what will change the dynamics for our city to allow us to accomplish all the goals that we've been talking about over the last 2 years when it comes to actual deep tax cuts and pay raises and the other components that we've been talking about. As a reminder, from a revenue standpoint, the 2 key categories, tax revenues and proffer and land revenues. And as a reminder of the tax revenue, those are not the commercial taxes that we're generating from that, where we didn't even factor that into this analysis because we wanted the commercial taxes to be kind of an added component for the future plan of the city. We want to just make sure at least that with the real estate tax and personal property tax, that would be enough to more than cover for this project, and it is. And as a second reminder, the tax revenue is net tax revenue. So whatever these are generating in tax revenues right now, we subtracted those amounts and those forecasted amounts over the next years from the actual revenue counted as well. So subtotal revenue over the next 30 years, we're looking at about $132 million, the majority of which is residential real estate and personal property taxes.
I got a question for you.
The lease purchase cost, this is the direct cost associated with the development. That's part of the lease purchase agreement for the city hall and the associated public infrastructure for the city center, downtown area, the public parking, public roads. We'll go over that in a later slide. But that's roughly $40 million if you round up over the next 30 years. So the net fiscal impact profit here for this model is $92 million. The TIF, which I'll describe here shortly, if you add that up, that would add an additional $13.5 million to the cost, and that's where the $78 million comes from. So when I say 78 to 92 million, that's why you have the range. It has to be TIF or not. So as a reminder, this updated table from the public hearing is based on the fact that we added an additional 24 residential units from the public hearing, which means this number went up. And then from an expenditure standpoint, we lowered the expenditure by roughly $6 million by going with a 3-story city hall option versus a 4-story. There was a lot of meetings to discuss kind of the pros and cons as we were negotiating this agreement with the developers, Norton Scott, and we were going back and forth via negotiating what's the best outcome. And the 3-story is the outcome that enables us to pursue the TIF option. That's why we ultimately decided to pursue the 3-story option, to have that option of pursuing the TIF because of the added expenses. We'll go over with TIF very shortly. But just as a reminder from the public hearing, the net fiscal impact profit then was $81.4 million, 4-story option and 290 units. So without the TIF that you're talking about, it growing from $81.4 million up to 92, $22 million, right? So more than a $10 million increase because of saving some money on the City Hall building itself, so reducing expenditures and adding some additional revenues as well from the residential unit count. So the $13.5 million of TIF, so we're going to evaluate the TIF option if it does not exceed this max of $13.5 million. That was the initial estimate we received about what it may cost. The market is crazy right now because of COVID-19, and combined with the Arlington has, for their Boston area, they had a TIF as well, and there was some issues with that TIF, so we're not certain right now that we're going to be able to actually secure a TIF if we pursue it, but we still want to actually pursue that option if it's affordable. The reason why we want to pursue the TIF is it guarantees, it locks in that only the new tax revenues generated by the development are used to pay for the new City Hall and the public aid. That is, it locks in a promise that there is going to be no impact to this development, to our current taxpayers. That's what the TIF locks in. So think of it again as an insurance premium. If the residential development is delayed, so we don't have the upfront tax revenues as we start making the annual lease payments for the City Hall and infrastructure. If the residential units are delayed, there's no existing tax impact to our current taxpayers by pursuing the TIF. So if you look at the numbers here, think of it really as when you had an $81.4 million profit before, it goes down to a 78.7, right? So drop by close to $2.5 million. So essentially we're paying in reality roughly around a $2.5 million loss in revenue. So we're foregoing an extra $2.4 million in revenue to make sure that existing taxpayers see $0 impact from this development. That's why this option was attractive to pursue. Again, we have to see the market realities right now from a financial market standpoint if we're able to actually secure this TIF option in the market. So you can see in the contract itself, it says we're going to pursue it, but we still have time to evaluate this option and see what the market reality is over the next few months before we decide 100% to pursue this specific option for protecting current taxpayers.
Elena, question. When will we benefit from the tax revenues? When do you expect? What's the estimated time?
Yeah, so I have a table later on in this presentation that actually goes year by year for the first 10 years. So I'll just kind of show you kind of what the current forecasted revenue year by year looks like as we get to that later on. So with this slide, thank you, Dean, who found one error. I forgot to update one number. These numbers have been constantly in flux, so as I change one area, I need to remember to change another. So this is the most up-to-date information for those who were not in the public hearing or didn't watch my public hearing recording from a couple months ago now. Just as a reminder, we're netting just over $1 million per net acre of residential land that we're receiving. As a comparison, when the city agreed to the phase 2 development, they received $44,000 per acre. So this is a much better deal for the city than what the practice of the past has been. We're not just securing sustainable, realistic strategy to make retail actually work in our downtown. We're also securing market value in terms of the land that we're utilizing. So that's a big deal. So total from a land proposition, you're talking about $13.3 million, $1 million for phase 4 and $12.2 for phase 3. And with phase 4 is, when I showed you that concept plan before, there might actually be additional acreages that come to the city with that additional parking as well. In reality, the city may end up receiving more acres than it gave up and still getting this money. So again, both of these transactions are just great deals that protect the city and make sure that we receive the proper return for our land. And And then we calculated the proper values for both of these developments as well, 2.4 million for phase 3 and then 5.9 million for phase 4. The total cash flow to the city after deductions for public improvements, so the city hall and the public infrastructure, the biggest one. So $8.6 million total in cash will be in our hands, and the rest of it is especially applied to all the different public infrastructure components for those projects. So it makes sure that we get those projects at a discount essentially by utilizing deductions to the proper and land value. So we get the $8.6 million cash in hand, and then much cheaper cost for the public infrastructure associated with the development than if we were to go out and do these developments on it. For the city hall, this is an update. I updated the table. There was a table that was very similar to this in the public hearing, but I updated it to hopefully make it a little bit more clear at all of the costs associated with the costs for the project, and then all the public, direct revenues, not including tax revenues, right? So all the revenues, not including tax revenues, and then the direct costs to see kind of what's happening here. So we're talking about cost for city hall and the public infrastructure. So the cost for the building itself is roughly $16.5 million. What this lease finance cost, capitalized interest, what this means is because we don't start making payments for a few years, even though the developer and the trustee are securing the financing almost immediately, there's accruing interest that's part of that financing that gets paid back to the expenditures. But I wouldn't worry about this because you'll see there's kind of an offsetting financing premium as well to that $1 million. But I wanted to show you all the costs associated with this. And then you have the cost for the public infrastructure of about $9.7 million. That involves the new roads that are being added or components, our share of the new roads being added to the downtown. The developer is paying for their share for those roads as well. And then even for Park Center Core, you're talking about some streetscape improvements as part of the public cost as well. A ton of downtown public parking being provided to the city, not just surface parking, but also the underground VRE parking is a very good likelihood that we would be taking that on. And why this public parking is so important is because we have that existing ground lease with the Park 170 at City Center, the original Phase 1 City Center development. We can't just say, okay, we'll go on our City Hall site without making sure that we have public parking that we can then utilize as negotiations with the Phase 1 owners to make sure that we're going to lock in that they have enough parking for their commercial when that becomes successful as well. And that's what both Phases 3 and 4 help us to accomplish, along with providing downtown parking to make sure all the commercial is working as well. But again, that's going to be public parking that the city will own and control. There's also stormwater components to all this development. You're adding a lot of pavement here, so there's going to be some stormwater. So our share of the stormwater, and then the water and sewer infrastructure, and all the different utilities associated with our city hall building as well. And then there's the cost for land acquisition, which is actually a big part of the contract, what we had the public hearing for on March 19th with what may be referred to as land swaps. Essentially, we're selling the Bays tract to Morgan Scott. They're giving us the cash that's part of this deal here to then go ahead and acquire the properties that they have under contract right now, and then one remaining property that may need to be acquired via condominium. So the total cost, when you add all the costs associated with the city hall and associated public infrastructure, roughly $35.5 million. When you look at the revenue, so the non-tax revenues, remember we're just talking about the actual revenues from the deal itself, because we know the tax revenues generate much more revenue to offset these expenditures. But just from non-tax revenues, the financing premiums of $3.5 million. Essentially, what this is when they're selling, when the developer or the trustee is selling the bond on the market. Let's just for simplicity, let's state that the value, the principal is $100, but the premium or the amount paid by the investors to their bond that they're selling is $102, right? $2 represents a premium, a financing premium that Norris Scott's putting back into the city's favor as part of their financing arrangement. So that's a credit in the city of $3.5 million. There's also the land that we talked about, so the land value, right, that's being put in as equity, and then the actual cash that we received from the phased plan of $3.5 million, and then the cash proffers associated just with phase 3. This does not include the phase 4 money of $2.7 million that we're also receiving. So in return, the city receives $18.2 million, and net from these two, the city owes an additional $7.2 million to make the project whole. I just want to clarify that this is not what's actually going to happen. Of course, the numbers are always subject to change, but we're also, what this table is showing is a static shot of, think of it as fund balance, right, versus cash, where this is a static representation of this deal, where if we were to get incur all the expenditures at one time and have all the revenues at one time, this is what we would owe. But in actuality, that's not what's actually happening, right? So what we're actually going to do, the purchase agreement, right, make sure that we're paying for these capital assets over the life of the assets themselves, which is how you do capital planning and budgeting. So we're taking that total cost and we're subtracting it by the revenues of the financing premiums and the phase 1 land value, which together is $12.3 million. So you're subtracting the 35.5 by the 12.3 million, which again is the sum of these two. And that leaves you 23.2 million when we round up. Again, these are all rounded numbers, so in actuality, the numbers are going to be slightly different. And then it's 39.9 million over 30 years because of the interest. This is the actual amount that the city's paying for in terms of the lease purchase agreement principal balance. And then the remaining of the 5.9 million in revenue would be as cash. And that remaining 5.9 is this 3.5 million for the land for phase 2 land cash value, and then the actual it's actually called two things in the budget. There's a developer contribution to the city center infrastructure, and then the actual builder cash proffers of $2,000 per unit as well that the builder is going to pay the city prior to receiving an occupancy permit. Any questions on this one? Because I know this one's a handful before I move on to the next slide. Okay. So this is the same exact slide that I went over again in the public hearing, but just in case if there's someone viewing tonight who wasn't able to listen into the public hearing recording. Essentially, the way we're going to be paying for the remaining cost of the city hall and public infrastructure after the revenue allocations, that $23 million I referenced in the previous slide, through a 30-year lease purchase agreement between the city and the developer and potentially trustees and city authorities such as the development authority, depending how we want to structure it. But essentially, if we're going to do the certificate of participation, which was the first lot that we were going to conclude, the developer's trustee secures an investment revenue that's placed in the escrow fund. The escrow is drawn down by the developer as a construction funding source to build out the city hall, the full project with the associated infrastructure, and the public roads and the public parking and those components. And then, so as part of that agreement, the developer and the contractor guarantee the project at cost and completion schedule. And then the city will appropriate lease payment to the developer with a trustee and an annual budget commitment. Right now, estimated July 2023. And then the full title to the city hall building will be brought to the city at the end of the lease term and finish making all the lease purchase payments. And then I believe there was a kind of $1 payment at the end of that 30 years in order to have the full unencumbered title of City Hall back to the city. I know this was a very controversial issue on Facebook, claims that this was the city incurring debt. That's not the case. Yeah, the key element that is not defined as debt by the law of the Commonwealth of Virginia or how the city itself, from a budgeting standpoint, tracks debt. And if you look at page 56 of your packet, I just took a snapshot of that and the actual financing closed. I'm just going to read this out loud for those who are listening in. So the obligation of the city to make payments under the purchase agreement will be subject to annual appropriation of the city for such purpose. Neither the lease revenue obligations, the participation, or the lease purchase agreement constitutes a debt of the city or a pledge of the faith and credit or taxing power of the city. So it doesn't constitute a debt. The lease revenue obligations, certificate of participation in the premium, if any, and the interest of them shall not be deemed to constitute a debt or a pledge of the faith and credit of the Commonwealth of Virginia or any of its political subdivisions, including the authority, trustee, and the city. That right there spells out kind of the legal parameters of what's debt and what's not. And from our budgeting standpoint, we've never classified lease purchase agreements as debt. That's how we fund our fleet program, is through lease purchase agreements. A good argument can be made from a budgeting standpoint. Perhaps we should track all of our fixed costs, including our leases as well. I think that's a good idea. If someone wants to make an argument, I think that's a good idea, but we can change the rules of the game and start classifying things that haven't been debt in our budget or law of Virginia, calling that just because we disagree with this project. It's financial best practice. We look at all of our fixed long-term liabilities. I'm on board for that. I think that's a great idea, but we should change those rules for the following budget and show all of our leases and not call this something that it's not. It's always good to budget for the long term, so I'm always in agreement with looking at long-term impacts. But we also have to look at our long-term unfunded liabilities when we're going to look at our long-term actual liabilities as well. Those unfunded liabilities are true liabilities. Facilities fail, right? I talk to schools right now, they're chiller, right, at the middle school. The constant facility failures that we have to deal with as our those are unfunded liabilities, and this strategy is helping us to address the two last remaining large-scale unfunded liabilities that existing taxpayers have to figure out how to pay for, and that's the Public Works Building, which is the oldest public building in the city, and then the City Hall as well, both of which are failing. We also have additional two school facilities, the maintenance section and the transportation buildings that are also, they're looking for new facilities to address those requirements as well and to provide some additional educational opportunities for our students in their maintenance section and transportation as well. So we're looking for unfunded capital liabilities that the city just doesn't have money to address right now. This development deal allows us to do that. So if we're going to look at all of our long-term liabilities, our actual debt, our leases, right? We should also look at unfunded liabilities as well. So just to be consistent, and if we're genuinely concerned about our long-term financial health, that would be the right way to pursue it. The city's very focused on reducing its actual legal debt and taking that down because that's the biggest contributor to the city's financial position along with our weak tax revenues. So I just wanted to clarify that key point because I know that was a big issue.
Does it matter a TIF or no TIF?
About the actual revenue timeline.
TIF or no TIF, doesn't matter.
Is the revenues and also
TIF
the payments.
or no TIF, doesn't matter.
Say the lease purchase payments for the red areas. So you have two tables here, one showing what it would look like if we're not successful in getting the TIF, or we evaluate and determine, maybe it's better to not do the TIF. Right, this table shows that. This shows what it would be with the TIF. So the revenues are static in both, right? Looking at the tax revenues here for both phases 3 and 4, along with the proffer and land cash, that $8.6 million that we were talking about before. This is what the revenues will look like. You can see it's a little bit low the first few years, and then really start skyrocketing once you especially get to FY26, where it more than covers any of the payments that we have to make. But just looking at this from a total revenue aggregate perspective, in FY '23, if everything goes to plan, remember, development timelines are always subject to change. But you're looking at roughly $2.4 million in revenue the first year. The payment in the first year following completion of the hall would be $166,000. So you're generating a pretty sizable profit first. You generate a profit each year. This is the lowest year in FY '24. If you're not utilizing the proper land revenues for that, technically you would have a funding gap in FY '24. But again, if you're going to, since you're getting these property land route cash as part of it, the city's really not losing any money those years. It's borrowing these funds if we want to use these funds for other purposes. So we never have a funding gap in any year. You can see how sizable these profits get towards the latter years. Look at the annual payments. This is without the tip. Again, a 3-story option. So that's less than what was shown in the public hearing presentation. That was the 4-story option, right? So with the tip, again, the revenues are the same. But now you see the difference in the actual payments. You're paying that extra premium, right, to make sure that they're to lock in case what happens if these revenues do not come at this time, right, because the residential market has failed and now it's delayed by a few years, right? What happens to our taxpayers in this scenario if that happens, if they're pushed back? Well, then you actually do see a deficit. In the long run, you still have major profits, right? But you're borrowing in the short term, right, from those future profits if the residential development is paid. With the TIF, you never have to do that because the payments themselves are subject to what the revenue is, right? So if the revenue reaches kind of the benchmark for what the annual payment should be, well, that's what you're paying. If you miss it in certain years, right, then that's where you kind of have to make it up during the rest of the payment cycle. There's other kind of strings attached with the TIF, which is why we have to take a look at that before we actually pursue it. But that's the idea of the TIF, is that it makes sure that even if this residential development gets delayed, the burden doesn't fall on the existing taxpayer, which is shifting that risk over to the lenders, which is why the lenders then charge a large premium, a higher interest rate for this vehicle of financing. And there's higher insurance rates as well with that type of financing. So let's see, did this answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, somewhat. I think with the TIF, it doesn't, I guess, I don't know if I'm reading this right. Where does it say we could use the revenue for the city?
Yeah.
After we're paying off, I'm saying, where's the break-even point?
Yeah, so again, you have to look at the total value and then of what's actually, so remember, I'll go back to remember this number here, right? That's our not to exceed. So let's say we do add that, right? This 13.5 to this 39.9. You're dividing that by the years of the 30-year payments, right? So any revenue you're getting above that is then profit. Remember this, going back to this, you can see in the later years, there's never going to be a scenario where the city isn't getting profits, right? Even within the first 10 years, right? There's the latter years, once again, once you get to FY '26, or if this all shifts right for 3 years, sometime in FY '28-29, you're generating large profits regardless of the financing mechanism by which the trustee is securing the funds.
Yeah, okay, I see that now. That makes sense. So it's a 13.5, and you divide that by the, I guess, revenue coming in 35 million, or the expense?
Yeah, the total expense, you would add it to the total expenses. Remember, that's just it raises the interest and the insurance premium that you're paying, right? So it's just an added cost. Think of it again as an insurance premium. So that's why this slide is a piece, because our initial analysis was we were going to be getting $1 million in profit, right? we're essentially foregoing, over $2 million of that profit, right? Which we don't have right now. These profits don't exist if we don't do this development, right? All this is zero if we don't do these developments. But essentially, we're foregoing $2 million extra profit as insurance to make sure that existing taxpayers pay $0 on our new city hall and all the associated public. That's what the TIF is buying, right? It's protecting the existing taxpayers, but you have to pay a premium to do that. Just like with every transaction we do, right? We're not a dictatorship. We can't just force ourselves to, every contract to match exactly what we want, or every deal to match what we want. We're three people negotiating, right, the contractual terms for everything that we're doing. So there's people who, there's a risk to this for the lenders, right, to the trustee. They want to capture and secure their own risk, which means they charge a higher interest rate for providing that funding mechanism.
The difference, Lazo, is $450,000 a year.
Oh, you're looking at the annual amounts?
Well, I'm saying is I took 13,500,000 and divided by 30, and so that's the difference every year.
Correct.
Is there anyone?
Do we recover any of the fees, payment?
So how do we cover it? Yeah, so that's, if when you look at the comprehensive agreement, where we talk about the TIF, it's in the agreement itself and in the budget, interim budget, it talks about doing a full evaluation of the entire city center area, right? So that all new revenues associated with that, right? The buildings that are going to be built by phase 2, which they hope to start construction this year. All the phase 4 stuff as well. That's what we're going to want to showcase to investors is the full vision, the full scope, right, of what the downtown is going to be, so that there can be some kind of agreement on what the terms are for some kind of TIF. We would allocate those new development revenues to that TIF until it reaches the point, to the most point, the 1.3 million in 23, or thereafter. I believe the static is around $1.8 million, assuming that 13.5 million. Remember, that's the max. I don't think it's worth it. There's a certain point where it's not worth doing it, right? So we took the decision to reduce the building from 4 stories to 3 stories, right? In order to really pay for this TIF, right? We're foregoing an additional $2 million, and we've reduced the size and scope of the city hall building, all to be able to ensure that our taxpayers are 100% protected. Going this route, right, if the residential development is on time, which seems to be the case every time we do residential development, residential always happens first, right? The critique has always been, we get the residential and we don't get the commercial, right? So this will be the first time we get all the commercial and none of the residential, which, if we get all the commercial, again, we've done a good job as well. We've accomplished something. But if this is the actual scenario, right, of the development, scale and pace, then certainly we wouldn't have to do this. It would be better not to do this. You generate an additional, $15 million for the governing body and for taxpayers over the next 30 years by not doing this. But we can't predict what's going to happen in these years. That's just like with any insurance that you buy, you're buying insurance because you can't foresee the future, right? You want to pay a premium to protect yourself in the future. And that's what this is.
Councilmember Sendejas, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay. Vice Mayor Banks, do you have any questions?
Is he there?
Preston, are you
I don't have
there?
any questions. Well, actually, I have a question about the, going back to phase 4's design. It seems like it's disjointed versus the city center, because the parking lots at the front versus the buildings that should be on the front.
Remember why the parking's in front? Because we want the adjacent parking to support the phase 1 retail, right? Ideally, when you're building commercial, the easiest way to do it is to have parking in front.
Oh, okay.
The next best is adjacent. The worst is behind and far away, right? Like non-accessible. And that's what we did with phase one, or the city did in the past, is they build non-accessible parking for retail. So with what phase four addresses, is put a ton of parking, right, along this area. Remember, the departments need to front Manassas Drive. There's no retail component. But we need all this parking to give the best chance possible for phases 1 and 3, and then ultimately this commercial building to be successful. And the commercial building itself is aligned along Manassas Drive to keep that same feel that you have with phase 1.
Okay, I see
We're
that.
expecting a retail, but in worst case, you know, if we're really expecting commercial offices or hotels like that, but if you do have some retail, you can have it running Manassas Drive with some of the, all this adjacent parking, or as a worst case for this retail, you can just have it fronted in this area, the parking itself. I know that doesn't match the look and feel of the full town center, but again, remember the focus for the town center is the Four Corners area, right?
So I got it. I know the full point of area.
That's really the priority for where we want retail fronting Manassas Drive and that kind of modern town center feel that doesn't have on it.
Okay, thanks, Laszlo. That's good.
Regarding the payment schedule for the first 10 years, are we including any commercial that might come to Park 170 in our TIF payments?
I think you're gonna have to do that in order to actually get investors to. But again, if you're getting that retail in, right, we've done our job, we've accomplished our goals. If that retail is coming in, then it's more than likely that the residential is coming in, and then these numbers just skyrocket. Remember, this, for example, in FY '26 is $3 million, assumes $0 from sales tax and sales tax and retail. If you're getting businesses in, this number now skyrockets. Right, so it's always going to more than cover what the annual payments are that we're making, whether it's the lease purchase agreement, financing, or the TIF. We're always going to be making more ultimately when residential comes in. And let's say again we pursue that scenario that's 0.0001% likelihood of happening, where the only thing that comes in is the retail. And again, we're still in a better position than we are today. Today, it's empty, right, and we don't have a new city hall. Under that scenario, it's full across the street. Our residents now have job opportunities. They have, expanded shopping and dining opportunities. It's no longer a black eye for the city that is empty. And now we have a new city hall. So it's still a better, even that worst case scenario, it's still better than the status quo. And that's what we always have to compare what the alternative to the alternatives. And the alternatives is the status quo for this one, because we pursued another option over the last 10, 12 years that just wasn't based in reality. So with this strategy, we're pursuing a more feasible solution, and we're comparing that to the status quo.
Councilmember Shoemaker.
That's why sorry, I have another question before.
Go ahead.
We move on. When will phase 3 start and when will phase 4 start?
Yeah, I'll actually, so the mayor asked me to develop a timeline slide to go over with you all in the public, and that's Gan's presentation. If we can wait, I'll take that.
Yeah.
Councilmember Shoemaker, do you have any last questions?
Well, I had a question about what the assumption was on the tax revenue, because one of my issues is that, and I brought this up before to you, was that the real estate tax rate was assumed to stay at $1.55 through the next, I don't know how many years you took it out, but, and it wasn't at a lower rate, as we've talked.
Yeah, so we have to do an apples to apples comparison. So if I'm looking at net revenue, I have to look at the current revenue at the $1.55 and assume that that tax rate stays flat and that it actually grows, right, by the percentage that we're talking about. If I were just to say that this revenue is going to be based off of that rate and the existing, would still be at the 155, and that wouldn't be apples to apples. But to your point, I just want to let you know that the Morris in their financial model, they actually use a tax rate of $1.48, not the $1.55, and we also put 5% margin of error cut. right? So we not only use the $1.48 tax rate, we also took a 5% margin of error reduction.
We're,
But I see, if future governing bodies, and let's say FY 35, dramatically cut taxes, yeah, you're not gonna get that full $90 million. But that's the potential, that's the rate we have right now. You're still gonna get a profit. It's a good problem to have. Now you've been able to reduce taxes before going that additional revenue, right? That 90 million. You're saying that some of that 90 million needs to go to our taxpayers, and we're gonna reduce taxes and take 30 million of that 90 million and give it back to our residents. That's what's enabled by this development. If you don't have this development, you don't have that option.
well, I mean, debt does decrease in FY '23, which is, this would magnify that, but.
It's not down to 148.
Any other questions before Laszlo continues? Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, back to the city hall itself. This again is the updated rendering, the 3-story option. As we go through the next few slides, remember that this is what the building looks like, and this is the plaza that it's fronting. That's fronting the city hall. There was no change to what was presented at the public hearing for the first floor. Just as a reminder, you have some ground level retail that's part of the city hall building right now, including this retail space for restaurants or other retail. And very specifically, we're targeting a coffee shop for this location to actually be connected with our library that we're bringing to the actual city center area for story library options. And then because of the high rate and high quotes that we got back for the room facility where we wanted to ensure that the registrar had enough space for the upcoming presidential election, we weren't able to work that out. So we had a plan to address the registrar shortfall, and we do that in the first floor of the city hall. And that's where the registrar is. Going up to the second floor, this is the second floor of the library. The remaining, so it's going to be on top of the tax shop and the first floor library. You also have the governing body chambers. So you'll have the view, behind the dais of the actual plaza and the city center. And then the new change with the second story is the city administrative offices, which makes sense. We're going to now be adjacent to the governing body chambers from the city administration standpoint. What used to be there is flex office space. The flex office space was built in. The city wanted to take advantage of leasing opportunities like we do right now with ASAP to generate additional revenues for our city. And it also allows us to grow within this as we become a larger staff and a larger community. That's what we essentially went without by going with the 3-story option. We also reduced some of our storage capacity as well with the 3-story option. With the 3-story option now on the top floor, you'll have the schools, which is there on the top floor of our current city hall as well. And then another customer area for the treasurer and the commissioner of revenue will be adjacent to each other to facilitate collaboration and to make it easier for our customers so they can get a number and then sit down in this large customer service container. They don't have to wait long lines anymore. If there's future pandemics, we can make sure we're, social distancing all of this space to continue to serve our residents. And then they can come to the customer window, and it's not if it came to the treasurer and it's really a commissioner issue, well, then you just go to the commissioner to work together to resolve the issue of the customer themselves. And then the storage and server room are now on the 3rd floor. They used to be on the 4th floor, and we used to have a lot more space for those. That's been condensed, so we're going to have to look at the room facility for storage, which is a much cheaper build out than an actual office, which is what we're planning at the registrar. We have to look at that as a storage unit for both the city needs and also the schools if we don't have enough storage space within the existing city hall. Or the new city hall, sorry. So we have the actual agreements. We have the comprehensive agreement for phase 3, and then the purchase and sale agreement for phase 4. For phase 3, you have the base agreement, the comprehensive agreement. It spells out that everything that's going to be developed, the different phases, timeline, really that should be anchor lease parameters. It would most likely be a theater. Any kind of entertainment anchor is what we're pursuing here. Lays out some parameters for how to secure that in. That's the other value of this agreement. You know, the complaints across the street are always, well, they're charging too much. Well, guess what? We built in this contract, a mechanism to make sure that we can provide a very favorable rate to the anchor to lock them in. Land swaps, land transactions are identified there, the rezoning schedule, and condemnation that's required, and then, of course, all the protected contract language for both parties. And then we have a lot of exhibits. I didn't list them all here, but the major ones, the actual master plan, the layout of the actual development, some of the vacation plats, boundary line adjustments for the parcels to rearrange the current boundary lines for how the parcels are currently structured, the interim budget, which I covered at a very high level in this, and that goes over more details in this exhibit. The city lease term sheet, which is the foundation for the purchase agreement, and for how the North Scott trustee will secure the certificate of participation. And then the City Hall functional narrative, which our consultant helped us develop. So it's probably the longest component of the actual full contract. The offer statement, and then the initial schedule. And then again, I'm going to have a slide here which goes over throughout, all the downtown, kind of what the schedule was, the different moving parts are. For these next few slides, I'll go over some highlights and of the actual agreement. The first few bullets on this slide are not different from the public hearing. A little bit of change in the verbiage, but the bold one is something new. So for the first bullet there, again, we go over the land swap details. I discussed briefly before. The base tract is the first kind of land transaction that we sell to the developer in exchange for that cash payment, put in the escrow fund, utilized to purchase remaining private land that's under contract, and also to support our condemnation efforts as well. Then after the agreement, if it's approved, we'll have to do the rezoning of phase 1A, which is city's initiative, and then the remaining rezoning later in the fall, which would incorporate the phase 1A rezone as well. For this bullet down here, this is new. It's something that we negotiated a change from the public hearing to the benefit of the city, where the city's actually going to retain ownership of the building B to be party to the negotiating deal for the actual theater as well. An extra push that we need to have control over that final contract. So think of it as kind of a three-party contract where the landowner, and then the building will either be that large building B that has the different components to it, or if the anchor wants standalone or purchase versus lease, right? We have that flexibility because again, the goal is to lock in the anchor. That's what we'll make all of this commercial work and then all future commercial aspirations that we have beyond just these spaces. The only work is to secure the anchor. So retaining ownership rights of that parcel for building B is a huge benefit to the city. So the developer will essentially do all the site work as part of that. So it's kind of a pad ready for the actual business. So that's a great part of this contract for the city to really, again, give us the best chance to be successful. We hear it all the time that, well, this is going to fail, this is going to fail. Nothing in life is guaranteed. What we are pursuing here is giving ourselves the best chance to be successful. We're utilizing the smartest tactics to maximize the chances that we are successful in our downtown, and therefore transforming the financial future of our city. So the expected completion of phase 3, we're looking at sometime between FY27 and FY28. It might be a little bit sooner, just depending on the residential market and how quickly they can develop those units and sell them. Again, phase 1A is the first component, and part of that component, again, is the city centerpiece with the building C, Plaza, and associated structure. The current timeline, the current goal timeline is December of 2022 completion. We know COVID-19 has delayed many things. We're hoping still to stay within that timeline. But again, everything is subject to change. That goes until 2022. As part of phase 1A, the developers committed to develop 172. After phase 1A commercial is completed, the city can move out of the existing city hall and move over to the new city hall. And then the developer can then develop, once we secure the deal with the anchor, the building B itself with the goal of completion sometime in 2024 or maximum 2025 if everything is working out the way it needs to work out. Then for phase 2 residential, so 70 of the 140 units are submitted to be built once it's rezoned and we have the city hall and associated public infrastructure lease purchase agreement in place. And they complete the phase 1A, they can then go ahead and build the 70 units. And then once building B commences construction, so we have the deal, the developers secure the financing to commence the construction, then they have the green light to go ahead and complete the remaining 70 units of the development. Further highlights, so what I described to you up until this point is the development plan A, it's called the actual contract. That's the development plan that we're pursuing, right? But with every contract, we need to make sure that we have some contingencies to protect the interests of the city and to protect their own interests as well. So it lays out, well, what happens if X happens, or what happens if B happens. So the first contingency is called development plan B. So for this one, it's really associated with the city hall and the public infrastructure. So the final budget is just, it just gets too high, right? It's just unaffordable at that point for the city. What we would pursue instead is the developer would construct own building A, instead of the city owning the developer would do that. It would be either a 14,000 or 1,000 square foot building. And then the city would own building B, the smaller building, that would be for our library and the coffee shop. That means that the city would have to find some other option for City Hall so that we can move out and they can go ahead and build building B for the anchor. The other options, of course, we can look at the phase 4, we can look at phase 2, right? Or we can look at the community center. There's different options that we would have to pursue again for this worst case scenario where the final budget for City Hall is just, it's too much for the city to afford. The other contingency is development plan C. This is if everybody rejects phases 1B and 2. So we know that by contract, we can't contractually obligate the governing body to vote on land use issues a certain way. So we have to build a contingency into this contract as well. So if phase 1B and 2 are not rezoned, then phase 1B and 2 are not happening, right? So that means, again, the developer would construct and own building A, and the city would own building C. We would still have City Hall here. So we can point purpose in looking for another option, which we would, could be part of building A. We would then get a different option for phase 1B and phase 2A for City Hall to continue that development. If the governing body rejects phase 1B and 2, then the likelihood of future development really go down. And then another portion of the contract that's a change from when we first shared with you is the land first option. So if on December 2027 something's happened, right, we've just been delayed with the market or whatever it is, building B is still not completed. Well, the city that has the first right options and fair market for the remainder of the privately held. Remember, we're still going to retain ownership of that parcel for building B, and all the site work is already pad ready. But then we want, in order to work with another developer, if this fails, right, the city protecting itself here, we would have another developer come in to buy the remaining residential land fair market value, so that the current developer can use their investment status as well, and to go ahead and develop the phase 2 as the current contract stipulates for it to be developed. So again, it's just another worst case protection for the city. We did our best to think of all the solutions and to protect both parties' interests as best we could. For phase 4, the purchase and sale agreement for phase 4, what I did here is a similar project than phase 3, but I really just copied and pasted direct verbiage components of the contract that really stipulate what the city is getting out of this. Again, the first bullet, that phase 1 of the old city center building with the empty retail, getting the parking goal for that, right? So the developer here has to build that 150 parking lot before they can construct the rest of the development. That again allows us to negotiate the amendment to the ground lease with the existing Park 170 at City Center only, so that we can go ahead and develop both phases 4 and 3 and fix their retail situation. And financial considerations are very simple. Total of $2.7 million, split really into two for each of the buildings associated with the actual buildings themselves. So once the developer, before they can get occupancy, they'll have to make these payments to the city. Connor Drive, that was another big component of the goal. We're extending Connor Drive out to 28, so we really wanted to connect Connor Drive both to Market Street and to Manassas Drive as well. And then that commercial building 3, the purchase of the truck, that 100,000 square foot commercial building as part of this. These are kind of major highlights for phase 4. That contract has been shared with the public since the public hearing in about phase 4 on May 19th, so it's been posted for over 3 weeks now. So by the time if this is considered for vote on June 16th, it'll be up for about a month for the public hearing, but it's a much simpler project than the phase 4. So here's the timeline that the mayor asked me to develop to really give you all and the public an overview. It's a very complicated timeline, but that's what this whole development is, and it's very complicated, but this is a useful reference to understand when things are likely to occur, and everything is subject to change here. But we have the 3 phases right now, one that's already approved and ongoing. There's still, it's in site plan review right now, so there's still some things that need to be done from a city planning process. The goal for, again, a residential component, an office and a restaurant. Their goal is to commence construction by the end of this calendar year. They really want to do 5 and see that as feasible. But the goal is for them to commence construction by the end of this calendar year. It really could be in construction throughout 2021, and then hopefully be completed by 2023, sometime in 2023. I'm sorry, 2022. My screen actually blocks the top row, if I can see it. Then for phase 3 itself, there's to delineate all the different components that are in phase 3. We have the, when we say city center, component of phase 1A, talking about the entire commercial area. We have city center phase 1A, the city center phase 1B, right? That's all part of phase 3, right? But it's the commercial component of phase 3. This summer, of course, we'll be working on the waivers that was taken for vote on June 16th, and along with the land transactions. Then after that, we'll be looking to, the developer will be working on securing financing and finalizing the city hall. So we'll be hearing to finalize the numbers for the city hall component and all the associated infrastructure, site plan review in 2021, and commencement of construction, and then completion 2023. So we said December 2022, January 2023, sometime around there, or spring of 2023, depending. But I want to be a little bit conservative here, so I put completion by 2023. The VRE garage is such a component for everything we're trying to do here. Really, for all this to work, we really do need the anchor, and we also need that VRE garage, and we need it located in the correct place to attract the anchor and all the different commercial components. So the goal for this summer is to have the 10% redesign completed and land agreement with the city itself no later than the fall. And then the goal is to start construction in 1. And their goal is to be completed December 2022, just like us. But just in case it goes up and be completed for 2023 for estimated completion for the VRE garage. For the residential component of phase 1A, very similar to the commercial component in terms of what's happening in the summer and in the fall, with developers seeking their own finance for residential construction, site plan review, commencement of construction. Goal again is 2021 that building goes to over twos, second first unit, 2022. Hopefully, moving on, to be converted, 2022, continue to build out over a multi-year process and complete in 2024. Not soon, hopefully sooner. But again, we're trying to put a conservative timeline here. It's residential, all of phase one is happening this fall, sometime this fall. The application for the rezoning for phases 1B and 2, being brought before the governing body, and site plan work, and some of the site work can actually begin while phase 1A is occurring on those properties. And then the goal is once phase 1A is completed and that work is done, they can commence construction. This is kind of the timeline for when they can commence construction, and then completion again for phase 2, the first 70 units. It can be a lot quicker than that. These are just kind of best, our best announced right now. Phase 1B, the anchor, really the focus this summer is negotiate parking grounding amendment with the Park 70 city center owners, so we can go ahead and develop parcel 1B. So we need to negotiate that first as part of the school development, the rezoning again in the fall, and the negotiations with the anchor business. It was very hopeful before COVID-19 to engage with them. The latest drop reports we saw last Friday was very good. There might be some that we can quickly rebound after the economy reopens. So hopefully the deal with the anchor is finalized in 2021, and then the goal for that is completion of construction either 2024 or 2025. And then the remaining residential units, again, they're slowly kind of being built out. They got the timeline right now. We're looking there's 2027, where you can add another column year, say 2028 as kind of points for phase 3. Phase 4, this summer, of course, we're going to be looking once the agreement is complete and actually doing the rezoning for the properties under the control of the city and the developer, and also negotiate the parking ground lease amendment with the Park 1 City Center owners. Site plan review, construction, and then completion of the parking lot sometime 2021, 2022. And then the goal, their goal is to move even quicker than this for the residential building A. Again, I'm putting a very conservative timeline on everything that needs to happen for both Connor Drive and the residential building A. And then the additional parking lot once building A is acquired. If the developer hasn't been successful with the remaining parcels, then the city would do that as part of this as a developer. And so the last properties would be acquired sometime around 2023, and we would commence construction with the parking and with building B, with the time the goal to be done by 2025. The commercial building, again, we won't have the market reality, so that really is dependent on phase 3, the actual building B, the anchor. Once that's completed and we have a successful town center, that's when you're going to see that additional commercial investment. And that's why we're putting the timeline further back to that one, because this one is really dependent on either building B happening or finding some kind of ready to move in as soon as possible. So again, this is a very conservative timeline, but again, it may not be conservative enough. This may all get pushed back even further, but this is a detailed kind of analysis of all the steps that are involved in this. I'm sure I missed some of the steps. Dean, I don't know if there's any major component that I missed with this table that you want to let us know.
Well, as far as the residential building A for phase 4, they can't acquire that property back there until the 150 space parking is completed, right? So it looks like so for residential building A, the construction can't commence until completion of the 150 parking lot, right? Because we won't sell them that land. So so the table's a little bit incorrect there.
To be moved back, this construction dimension needs to be aligned with, again, I think once we get the ground lease amended, the developer's going to secure financing for the residential building A before they even do the 150. So it's really a package deal. But at Dean's point, they have to finish that 150 spaces before they can start work on of the residential building A. So I'll make that adjustment. But again, it is a parking lot. The construction of the parking lot is not what's going to be time consuming. It's all the cleanup that may have to on these sites. Why this is such a difficult development and why we're thankful that Toledo Properties jumped up to the plate and was able to on this project. Did I miss anything else here or anything else on?
No,
City Manager, thank you again for this timeline. This is terrific. Let's do another round of questions, starting with the folks at home. Vice Mayor Banks, do you have any questions?
No question.
Okay. Councilmember Sendejas, do you have any questions?
No question, thank you.
Councilmember Machado, do you have any questions?
Yes, I have a question. Laszlo, when, or in what account do we keep the profit?
So if they're actual proffers, we have a profit fund in our audit, so it would have to actually go there. The land value, though, would go back into the operating fund balance. So it's free for us to utilize. Even though, the proffers you can utilize for capital expenditures and the actual payments themselves, these purchase agreement payments, are going to be in the capital budget as well, like our vehicle lease purchase agreement payments. So it's all going to support the same thing. So usually you're doing transfers. The only thing we have to do is the county, the finance team, to do a transfer from the proper fund, right? Once we get those revenues to the capital fund to pay for these payments.
Councilmember Javed, do you have any questions?
Yes, I got a question. Well, I got two questions, if I may. I'm trying to understand, I guess, the tip better. The tip, basically, we're taking that revenue, paying it for development. Residential comes in, pays the revenue for development of both buildings and a commercial site. Now, the revenue coming in, the school district, they cannot benefit from it. They're getting most of their funding from, I guess, property tax. So my question is, that revenue, the property tax revenue that's coming in from this development is basically frozen for them, or is it deferred? And how many years do they get to see, I guess, the revenue from that development?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let's assume that in the first 7 years, worst case, right, we're not generating a profit. All the new development revenues are you're right, from an annual perspective, there would be an operational revenue benefit to the schools. But remember that we're addressing a few benefits for the schools, right? So the new city hall is going to have a new office place for them. The current city hall, the facility, they're in agreement as well in terms of the issues with this building. We're giving them a new administrative office room. And then with again, my recommendation, you all don't have to do this, with all the proper money that we're getting from phase 4 along with the TAPI revenue, we go out and purchase the target building for the community development department, that building is sufficient then to house the transportation wing and the maintenance of the schools. We'll shift that over, those functions over to that building, right, to help them satisfy that requirement that they put in their CIP, and then they can fit those existing spaces for the additional classrooms that they want. If they want to do like a vocational training with those facilities since they're structured out. So there is a benefit to the schools, even if the city and the schools aren't seeing annual profits from the development for the first few years. They're securing some major capital liability that right now would have to be paid for the existing tax dollars. So their position is improved with this development. And again, I do believe we are going to see, eventually, we're going to see massive profits. And again, it does benefit them, but they're always going to remind us, as our financial situation improves, their state funding may fall, so we need to make sure that, and I did that in I remember the 2% budget model, that assumed the downtown was approved, so I showed you a 10-year model, what that would look like, and that provided a significant amount
more, I think about $700,000 more in the last year, right, for schools. So it was $1 million more just from the end of that year. And again, with each year of this development, the revenue just go up and up and up.
Do you have a follow-up, Councilmember Javed?
Yeah, I have a second part. I guess
Yeah.
this is in line with Miriam's question as well. So the excess if money goes to the general fund account, or is it a whole separate account?
Yeah, so it would be because it's the source of the TIF money is the same as our tax, right? So property taxes, personal property taxes. Again, I think we're going to have to include full wheels, sales taxes to be able to get the financing, right? Once we get it's going to show up as much more revenue for the city, right? But then we have to transfer a certain amount of that over for the TIF, right? Once you generate a profit, you get to keep more of that growth, right? So it goes back into the general fund. Miriam's point for the Proffers, that money from an audit standpoint has to go to the Proffer fund. But all the other revenues can go straight to the general fund.
So there's no separate account needed, so we can just go straight to the city fund.
Exactly. Again, the Proffers and then also the tap fees associated with the water and sewer. Those have to go specifically to the water and sewer fund as well. The capital project.
Okay. We've had one comment and one question come in. The first is a comment from Mr. David Wilmore. His comment is, it is obvious that city staff have put a lot of time and work into this presentation. And yes, Mr. Wilmore, they certainly have. We're very thrilled at all the work that staff has done, and we congratulate them. The next one is a question from Ms. Yessi Amaya. The question is, due to COVID-19, theaters might be suffering to make a comeback. What would happen if the theater falls through? What would entice business to open in the city?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. We've seen the arguments now the last month between Universal and AMC, where you decision about going straight to demand versus going to the theaters. The theaters responded. Disney has not done that. Disney is kind of the biggest player on the block. I think it may change moviegoing, where it's going to impact the movies that go to the theater. There may be some that will go straight to demand. But you're talking about the big blockbusters, like the movie Tenet in July, right? That still requires a theater experience, and you're still going to have moviegoers who are going to go through that. I think the concerns about us going back to normalcy should be listened by what we've seen over the last few weeks. I'm not talking about just the protests with mass gatherings of people, but as states reopened, you saw a lot of people packing into bars and restaurants, right? And again, we are very social creatures. We like to be with other people. So I don't think that this is a permanent change in human thought process. We've had pandemics before, 1918, then again 1960. That did not destroy, our desire to be together as people. But I think that's a little bit overstated. But certainly when you saw the news about what was going on with Universal Studios and AMC, there was cause for concern. I think the theaters that are more at risk are those that do not have the dine-in alcohol experience, that just are there to showcase movies. They may be at risk, right? People now are looking more for the experience, right? The dine-in experience, the ability to drink a beer, right, while watching these blockbusters that you need to figure. That's the type of theater that we're specifically targeting for the city. So I still am confident in our ability to do this. Yes, there's talks about theaters kind of structuring and have to do some remodeling to enable social distancing in the future. New construction of theaters will give them an advantage, right? So they don't have to do development. They can design and start doing social distancing as well. So I still believe that those theaters are targeting more of the dining and entertainment components, whether it's mixed in with arcade, gaming, other components. They're still going to be successful because, again, we are social creatures, and we have a very short attention span. We forget about things very quickly.
Councilmember Mensing, do you have a question?
Yeah. My first is, there will be a time gap between when building A and C are completed, which is slotted for December 2022, coming in 2024, are we concerned that that's basically going to be 2 years of empty retail?
Well, again, we're going to have full control of our building A retail, right? And I think already with the VRA garage, with the parking in phase one, right? There's going to be movement, especially if you have the deal in place with the anchor. There's going to be a rush for people that want to be the first to go, right? So I share your concern. If we had, more land to deal with, if across the street was never developed, and we can do this better, I would agree. We'd have to plan for the having it first. But the fact that we have to move out of this city hall first, right? And this is the only kind of space where we can do that. It is a limiting factor. With the specific business that we were negotiating the actual anchor deal, the 2024 timeline actually worked better for them because they were first working to establish their theaters in Richmond, or moving up to Northern Virginia. So the timeline actually worked better for them. So yes, I completely agree with the concern that this whole thing, from what I've said from the start, has to be done in order for all this to be successful. But I do foresee some movement even with the anchor, addressing the parking issue.
Okay. The other one was on, my other question is on our contingency plans. For contingency B, it says that the developer will construct and own building A and we own building C. Before we would do that second slot, city finds other option for City Hall to allow construction of building B. Could we just stop there and not do a building B and not kind of leave ourselves scrambling for a place to go? Is there a place to pause there, or would we be committed?
The way the agreement is structured, no, we would move out, to allow for the building B to happen, because to your earlier question, we need building B in order for all of this to be successful. So, no, we would have to proceed to find another option getting out of there. Now, can the timing be worked around? Well, they have to do the site work. They have to have a pad ready, so we would have to move out unless we want to amend this to, we would have to go back to amend the actual concept if that's the direction we want to head. But I would caution against that. I do think we need the building for all this to work, and I do think the other options that we could pursue to satisfy our city hall requirements.
My next question is actually in the comprehensive agreement. On page 7, there's a bullet C. I was just wondering if you could explain that kind of in layman's terms. It got a little number intensive. Page 7 of the comprehensive agreement, letter C.
It was cutting out.
Page 7.
Talking about the deposit, the use of the
Yeah,
deposit
the deposit
funding?
and then the payback, the entitled. Could you just, it just kind of went over my head.
The $3.7 million for the purchase?
Yeah.
Right, so the purchase price for lot 4-2 is broken into two pieces. One is so we can acquire the Leatherbury track, and the other one is so we can do everything else. So we will use it to acquire lot 1A, and then also pay for all the infrastructure that we're going to be doing on City Hall. So that includes the parking lot, the road, the basement, if you will, of the VRE garage. Mm-hmm. We get to keep whatever we don't spend on that. So that's basically that. The remaining $3.7 million is what we use for those other expenses.
Okay.
Because we went into this making it very clear the city didn't have any money to spend, but we still have these obligations, so we structured it this way so we can have two pieces. So one, we definitely have to get the Leatherbury tract right away so we can move forward with the VRE being relocated to the correct location, and then we just have the remaining money to deal with everything else.
Okay.
I mean, did that answer your question, or you still have?
No, it did. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
My next question is, for the open space, the splash pad, outdoor dining, how long will we be sharing that with the developer? When will we be able to take control of the events and things that happen there? I ask because we'll be in the 30-year payback period. So at what point do we get to resume control of that?
Laszlo, you can't hear, you're muted.
Thank you. Find it here.
We actually have to enter into an agreement with them on how we're going to use that open space area. There's no end time to that built into this agreement right now. So, since they're going to own Building C, then they'd still have a desire to use that for various things. So we'd have to come to a separate agreement on how that would be used. But Laszlo, I don't believe there's any end date for that, right? That's always just been a jointly used public area. Because we have some, you'll notice if you look at the master plan, there's some tables that are around there for restaurants. There's some areas in between the buildings for additional public use. But the public plaza area specifically we've set it up so that's jointly used. We have to come up with an agreement separate from this agreement for that, on how it's going to be used. But the city takes it says in the agreement that the city would have priority, and the agreement that we reach would have to make that clear.
Okay.
You have more questions, right?
Yeah, two more.
Okay.
So all the rezoning will definitely be finished in this year, 2020?
So they're going to submit, if you approve the agreement next week, then they're going to promptly submit. So, and we've built in kind of some basics that are going to have to be included in the proffers. They're included, but the idea is that since we've rezoned the first piece on our own, because we have to, we need to get this kind of moving along, they're going to...
Hang on a second. Could everyone at home please mute? Oh, there's some sound coming over. Thank you.
Right, so the rezoning for phases 1B and 2 are actually going to, they're really going to incorporate the whole thing, even though we've rezoned it first, because there are things that we did as a city that we want to have apply to the entire area, and it'd be easier just to kind of pull it all together. And I think Mickey actually had some comments about the rezoning, the proposed proffers, that right now, what we've done, what you've done, or you will do if you approve the rezoning, we need to make sure those conditions are also in the proposed rezoning for 1B and 2 as well. And I think they generally are. There might be a couple things that are still missing, though. So
Okay.
like, for instance, we have a $2,000 contribution, which we're calling a cash proffer. Well, right, for Phase 1A, it's contractual. It's not a zoning matter, because you can't proffer something against the city. So we'd want to go ahead and pull that into the overall rezoning for 1B and 2. And so they will go ahead and submit it right away. The goal is to have that approved in just a couple months, 2 or 3 months. So hopefully, fall it would be approved, or voted on, I should say.
Okay. And last question is, what's the timeline for finding out about our financing? Is that?
Punt that one to Laszlo.
Yeah.
Yeah, the goal would be by no later than December. We're done with the final budget and mechanism. And Mike, Scott, I don't know if you're on or not, do you want to add anything to that?
I'm on Mike. Yeah, we would start working on the financing in parallel with rezoning and getting the final budget. The goal was all that would come together in the fall, and indications are that the municipal markets are where we would, our underwriting basically place the financing are solidifying and rates are predicted to stay relatively low, so we're not expecting big surprises there. But our goal would be as soon as everything comes together and we've got the building design done and the zoning done, is to fund the financing and start the construction. And optimistically, we get it.
Thank you.
Okay. A comment has come in, Ms. Amelia Possenride, and I hope I pronounced your last name correctly, ma'am. The comment is, I would like to thank the city staff and broadcast team for this wonderful stream. It is very informative. Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
I had one, I don't know that I have any questions specifically. Alani did a great job, so.
Thank you.
I don't know that I have any questions specifically. I guess my concern is that, that this isn't, and I realize it's a trade-off between negotiations that we're doing, but I'm concerned that the language on the anchor, which, as we've been told, that's one of the most important things in this whole project. I feel like the language on the anchor is weak. We could have a scenario, which we've already discussed, that where we don't get the anchor at all. And, I think that would be a failure, a complete failure of this project if that happens. Because that's what we've been told didn't happen before, and that's what we're being told that would make these phases more successful, and also we're pinning the revitalization of phase one, the original phase one, on having a anchor. And if we don't have an anchor, then what we have currently, even with additional parking, will likely not prosper. So I don't know that it's a question, it's more of just a general concern about this project. Because in the end, there's no, we could get 6-7 years down the road before the city has the right to buy back the property. I believe it's 2027, I think it's December 31st. We could be down 6-7 years down the road with quite a bit of residential, maybe not all of what's envisioned, and perhaps a new city hall and no anchor. And that really worries me if what we're being told is we need the anchor for this all to kind of come together and be successful.
City Manager, can you comment?
Yeah, so I agree with you, Norm. It would be a failure if we didn't get the anchor. That's one of the primary reasons why we're doing this. So I agree with you that that's on us to vigorously pursue that. But I think the way that this community is structured, you can't have a better deal for a business than what we're providing the anchor here. I never. The deal I did in Lovesville did not have that, and it's 100% leased now, right? It didn't have these kinds of structures in place, so it is possible we can be successful. But the way this agreement is structured, gives us the best opportunity. The fact that we're retaining ownership of Parcel B until the deal is done, it puts us in the driver's seat as well. So it gives us the best chance to be successful. That's what this whole strategy with phase 3 and 4 is about, right? We had phase 1 in 2000, it failed. Phase 2 really didn't add anything of new of value to kind of change the dynamics of the commercial component of our downtown. So we looked at this over the last 2 years and decided or analyzed what needed to be done. What was the smart way to attack this to give us the best chance to correct the failure of the past? Again, nothing is guaranteed. There's always going to be roadblocks. There's been roadblocks, just 2020 has been a very difficult year, right? But if we want to fix this, if we're not satisfied with the status quo, and we want a better, financially more prosperous city and a successful commercial downtown, this is how you would do it, right? But I do agree with you. If you fail to bring in the anchor, then you're right. I do see this as a failure. But that's on us to continue to work to get that secured. But you're right. If we fail to do that, then that would be a failure, just like phase 1, the empty resale is a failure. The only difference here is this is much better situated to be successful than phase 1.
Any other questions, comments?
Just to kind of put it out there, what is the status of this building that we're in right now? What is the lifespan of this? What are we talking about for if we were to stay here, what it would cost and what that timeline would look like?
It's always very hard to predict what happens with facilities, but as things continue to break down, we have obligations to piecemeal kind of repair it. There's some big ticket items, right? The elevator is one of those. If it ever gets to the point where the one repairman who's been saving us on the elevator can no longer repair it, then we're gonna have to get a whole new elevator system for the second story. And you're talking about a major ADA issue until we do that, for access to our schools department, right? Our HVAC system itself, if we ever need it to actually work properly, right, would require some major renovations. Most things, bathrooms, there's multiple components of facilities themselves that require renovations. And the thing is, over the next 10 to 20 years, as we do those repairs and renovations, every dollar we spend on that is burdening the existing taxpayers. It's an unfunded liability that we don't have planned right now to address. And that again is the goal for the new city hall, is to take that burden off of our taxpayers.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, sir. Would you like to come to the microphone? Sure. State your name and address for the record, sir. Thank you.
My name is Young. I don't live in Manassas Park. I live in Manassas, so hopefully that's close enough. I became aware of the Connor house, the historical house on the property, and I was trying to, I'm a historical president. I'm not attempting elaborate plans, but my hope that somehow the house could be dismantled and moved off property, as we had briefly talked about. It's not a fairly widely or readily known solution, but dismantling can be done fairly rapidly within a couple of weeks. So I'm sort of just trying to piece this presentation here when the house is slated to be ultimately bulldozed or what have you, and how much time there might be to proceed and try and take it apart, move it off property, which is a totally different rebuild. Just trying to get apart, which is, as I've seen the house, I've walked around it. I think it pieces of stone that are condition, but I think 80 to 90% of it is salvageable, and certainly could represent at some point of years rebuilt or someplace nearby. That again, that's a different discussion. But when do we think?
Yeah, are you the gentleman who messaged me over
I did,
Facebook?
yes.
Okay. And did you contact city manager?
I have not. This is the first time I'm sort of trying to get,
Sure.
So that I can.
Yeah. He's on right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think realistically it's probably, you're talking about a 2-year proposition. But if you want to reach out to me, I can also connect you with the developer, because the developer has interest in helping to move the facility. So if you have an organization that can facilitate that, find the proper location for it, we can partner to make sure that it can be transferred. Because again, it's not the building itself; it's kind of where it's situated at.
Yeah. Well, it seems like it would be a win-win operation. It's often, in my experience dealing with construction companies and developers, they like the media glitz, if you will. It looks good if they've saved something in the process of building something new, as opposed, there's always a little bit of negativity surrounding a historical structure. And in the research that I've done, we've lost, by 2060, we will have lost approximately 90% of the houses built before the Civil War up and down the East Coast. So it is something that is, they're coming down in all over the place, like fireflies, I suppose, in the night. So I want to try to do whatever is possible, and I'd be happy to reach out to you, and we can further discuss. So that answers my question, though. Thank you. And thank you all. Appreciate it.
Yes. He's on the website.
Yes, very
Yeah,
good.
thank you for coming this evening.
I appreciate
Thank you
it.
for your comments.
I'm going to take off now, so you all can.
All right, have a nice evening. Are there any other comments or questions anyone would like to share?
Madam Mayor, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Laszlo, the parking for the registrar of the precinct one during elections, what is the parking for that in the new development?
Let me read there first. And let me- So the registrar would be located here, but there would be an entrance building here, so you can actually have lines kind of forming here. You're just going to have to kind of plan, you will of course work with her, support her to figure out how to best make the lines. But you have all of this parking here, surface parking lot, and then you have, during the daytime at least, the underground parking here, this parking here as well, and in worst case, all of this parking as well. So it's a lot more parking than what we have today, and a lot more space to deal with elections. And the good thing is, with the efforts that we did over the last year, it wasn't a lost effort. Like we took those designs and plans, and we utilized that to kind of figure out the best layout. So the layout that Patricia has in there, it has a lot more room for actual voting as well inside. And in addition, now you have kind of a lobby here, additional space for our public as they're lining up to vote. And then you have space on the plaza if we want. It would need to kind of close off areas to allow for lines to form outside the building. So we have a ton of parking over here for it.
Thank you.
Any other questions,
I was going to
comments?
make a comment to Miriam's point too, is with the early voting starting, that we may have less lines on election day because voting will be spread out over days or weeks, and so it may not. It's a good issue to bring up, but it may not be as big of an issue in the future because of more absentee and more early voting. That there'll be less pressure on election day itself, or I guess that will be precinct 3, because there's only one of the precincts will be there.
Any other comments or
Yeah,
questions?
I have a question or a comment as well.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay, it was, sorry, probably my notes. I think this was brought up by Alana. I think he commented that the 3.7 million could be used, however the city seems fit to use it. But per the agreement, it says it has to go into an escrow account, and that we could draw from it if there's any expenses accrued by the city, such as if they cannot build 174 units, we would have to reimburse them $50,000 per unit from that escrow money, correct?
Yeah, so Hasib, we don't get to use it as we want. Only after we've done everything we need to do with it, whatever's left over, we can use however we want. The 50,000 per unit is in there because that's what the $8.7 million is based on. It's based on getting that number of units on that site at $50,000 per. So, they're not going to pay more than what they had planned on it if they can't recover it through the sales.
And just to add, this 3.7 million is not part of that total 8.6 million in cash that we're getting from phases 3 and 4. It's part of the built-in budget, as Dean said, part of that 8.7 million, which is really intended for the land acquisition and condemnation for phase 1A.
Yeah, so if we have money left over, it's a good thing, but we don't necessarily have to.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
then would there be any reason for them not to be able to construct all 174 units?
It's just when they do the engineering of the site and they plan it out, whenever they do a residential development like this, they rezone it for the maximum amount they can hope to get on there, and then when they get on the site, sometimes they can't build that number. Now, you'll notice, though, we're only reimbursing them for that $50,000 per unit if they can't build those same units over on Phase 2. So Phase 2, if they could add additional units over there, if the engineering works, then we wouldn't have to repay that $50,000. So they're taking a holistic approach. So they'd get the same total number.
How are you defining one unit? One unit stack or one unit on the bottom.
Well, it's one unit is, yeah, so a townhome, a stacked townhome has 2 units.
Got it.
Anyone else? Questions, comments?
Are we going over the comprehensive agreement, or is, any questions?
Yeah, please, that's what this is for.
Give me a minute, let me go over my notes.
If you could, when you do it, if you could just tell me the page you're talking from, please. And Nasib, also, if you'll let me know if you're looking from the agenda packet or the agreement that was actually separate. So, because the page numbers are slightly different.
I have a question while he's,
Okay, what,
is the,
if anybody else has something to say, while I have a minute to gather my thoughts.
don't worry, I got you, Steve. Are the current above-ground utilities, did those get undergrounded in this latest proposal?
Yeah, so the only reason they weren't put underground before is because they weren't technically part of the Phase 1 project. They were on the City Hall site. Okay, so everything in this area has to go underground. Previous decision by the governing body, I don't know if it's in the comp plan or not, or if it was a resolution, but when they approved the Phase 1 project, everything had to go underground.
I just didn't want those to get lost because they're not new lines, and I know that everything new is going underground. I just wanted to make sure what's currently above ground would also get underground.
Well, I would assume that, but it's probably a good idea that we make that very clear if that's your desire.
Because I did bring this up before, and you said you were going to add it in, but I wanted to make sure it's actually in the agreement.
Okay, yeah, so, I mean, we have, is there any objection to, I mean, I'm assuming that was the.
That's the plan.
Yeah, so Chelsea Rao from Norton Scott, so that has been the plan, but it's just not specifically in here. We can add that.
Please add, thank you.
Okay.
Councilmember Javed, do you have your thoughts?
So I'm going down, looking for notes. I think it was in regards to the rezoning. Trying to look for that map. I don't know if you have a picture of the map on Phase 1B. I think it is. This one? Yeah, up there on Phase 2, I guess, on top.
What's the question about Phase 2?
Phase 1B is not part of Phase 2 rezoning?
Well, yeah, they're done, so we numbered them based, originally it was Phase 1 and Phase 2, and then we just kind of started breaking things apart, and the internal numbering system maybe doesn't make a lot of sense, but Phase 1B and 2 are going to both be rezoned at the same time, but they're going to be developed separately. So they're distinct phases that'll just be clumped together in the rezoning, and actually the whole site will be in the rezoning. It's just called the Phases 1B and 2 rezoning because those are the two phases that haven't been rezoned yet. But it'll actually be the entire project rezoning.
What would happen if one?
And then over to Phase 4, if the developer is not able to get the last lot for acquisition, is he still moving forward with Phase 4?
Yeah. You're talking about, so Phase 4, there's 2 parcels that he hasn't been able to get under contract. Those are the parcels that the city may be asked to acquire on its own. And there's timelines built into the purchase and sale agreement when that can happen. And then the developer would reimburse us for those costs.
The haunting word. Condemnation, I'm assuming?
It could. I mean, it's not necessary. So for condemnation, we have to make a good faith effort for an arm's length negotiation to come to an agreed upon price. It is a parking. It would be for public parking, so we could condemn it. as using Quick Take, and then so we'd actually own it, and then we'd just basically be figuring out how much we'd have to pay them. So it could be done through condemnation. It doesn't have to be. Similar to Lot 1A over on Phase 3, it doesn't have to be through condemnation. It's just, we would have to have a public hearing at which time we asked you to approve the staff trying to acquire it. And then that would be up to, and including the use of the eminent domain authority of the city, but that doesn't mean we'd have to. The ideal, of course, is that you reach an agreement and everyone walks away happy.
All right. Another concern with it, Phase 4 is that, I know in Phase 3, there was the initial, very first concept plan was to have multifamily instead of 2 over 2s. But as the timeline went on, they could not, I think it was a utility issue or something. Have the Phase 4 developer already done a site plan to, if they could do it multifamily, or would this change over a 2 over 2 later on?
Well, the rezoning, so right now, if you approve this agreement that we have before you, they'd have to do multifamily apartments because that's what's built into the agreement. And they'd still have to come forward with the rezoning as well. So they would proffer an elevation in a certain residential type. So you'll notice that we have in the...
I was saying, can they physically put a multifamily building on lots?
I presume so. I mean, they own the Artena building, which is essentially it's going to be very similar in size and makeup. So they were able to put the Artena building nearby. They're familiar with the requirements of that, and yet they've gone out and done a site visit. They've done analysis. They still do have a study period that's built into the agreement as well, but they've been doing ongoing studying of this site.
Yeah, so the big issue with Phase 3 was the stream here and the huge elevation change. But that is a stormwater easement that made it very difficult to fit. Remember, because the Phase 1A was always going to be 2 over 2, so there was always a multifamily component, because it was Toll Brothers who we first met with over a year ago now. So there was always kind of a 2 over 2 component, and then there was going to be, like you said, the multifamily component here, but when they came out and did the survey, they determined that it was not feasible, but that was because of the stream. That's not an issue in this area.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was referring to. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? This
I
might,
have another question.
yes, Councilmember Machado.
Yes, Laszlo, what is the, for building B of where the anchor is going to be located, will building B ever be, will it ever belong to the city or only belong to the developer?
Yeah, so we're going to retain the parcel until the deal is done. Once the deal is done, though, it wouldn't remain under city ownership. It would be either a full ownership by Norton Scott if it's a lease agreement with the anchor, or condominiumized with multiple owners, for the office, the standalone retail, and then the theater if they want to go that route, or if the theater just wants a standalone building without the office component, then it would just be the theater business themselves would be the owners. Those are kind of the three scenarios that could occur. But once the agreement is signed with the anchor, the development deal is in place, everything's under contract, financing's in place, we're going to have to convey that parcel over to the new owner.
Does the city have any saying on what the anchor could be? If the city doesn't come?
Yeah, we put it in there in the contract that we're going to We're going to do everything we can to pursue the theater until, I believe, December of 2024. With the deal we have structured in there, if we can't close the deal by then we're talking about a very unlikely scenario where that could happen. Doesn't mean we would completely give up, but then we would expand the horizons of other kind of entertainment style businesses, bowling, other components that wouldn't be as attractive as a theater, but if we just can't get the theater, we have to get something of entertainment value in there. But yes, because we're retaining the parcel, right, we have ownership rights, and yeah, we do have kind of control over the ultimate destiny of what's going to go.
Do you have a follow-up, Councilmember Machado? You good?
No, I don't.
Okay, good. Now would probably be a good time to repeat the invitation. Residents are invited to participate in a Facebook Live virtual town hall, and you'll be able to ask City Manager any questions that you feel were not answered during the work session tonight. Virtual town hall tomorrow evening, Wednesday, June 10th, and that's at 7 p.m. So, any other comments or questions? City Manager, do you have anything else you would like to explain to us that we haven't asked you?
I don't think so.
City Attorney?
No, I don't think so either. I will just say that if, in going through this, I've found a couple of minor typos, like you always will. So if you see anything like that, I know, Mayor, you've already sent me some stuff, please forward that to me as well.
Okay. If there are no other comments and questions, I think we are probably done for the evening unless there's anything else. Yes?
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
If we have time and we have the appetite, I could do the FY21 updated budget presentation. So that's not something I have to do next week. So save us some time next week.
Okay. Well, I would personally be delighted. How does everybody else feel about that? Okay, that's a yes.
Do we need paperwork, or is it just, you're just updating numbers?
City Manager, you already emailed that to us, is that correct?
I did, and it's posted on the website as well. When we open up the presentation.
Okay.
Mayor,
Are
while
there
he's doing
any
that,
objections from the folks at home?
Mayor, you'll have to actually take a vote, because this is a special meeting, so you're going to have to have a unanimous vote
Okay.
to change the agenda.
I see what you're saying, to change the agenda.
Right.
Okay.
We're going to be adding a new agenda item.
Do we have a motion to add this to the agenda? The
So moved.
FY21 budget amendment. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Hasib?
Aye.
Preston?
Aye.
Okay, the ayes have it. The motion is passed. Thank you.
Okay. I just want to say good night to all the people who joined us for the development stuff, unless they want to stick around and listen to our budget presentation.
They're gone already.
We know how to clear a room out.
Budgets tend to do that. Okay. So this is very similar to the FY20 Budget Amendment 2 presentation that I did last week. It really just focuses on what changed from last time. So what we did is we used the flat budget as a starting point and then added the different components onto the flat budget itself for FY21. So today I'll go over the highlights of these changes for the general fund and the enterprise fund. I'll show you the updated overview table, and I'll briefly discuss the CIP fleet analysis that was promised before. We did post both of the new spreadsheet, or the new spreadsheet today as well, and I sent you those links earlier. So feel free to look at those spreadsheets. They're structured the same way. I use the yellow highlights for anything that's changed since the flat budget. So for the general fund, the updated budget is about $28,000 less than the 2% budget, and then roughly $470,000 more than the flat budget. And that's not because we jacked up spending, we actually cut spending further, but it's because of the CARES Act money that we received. That's why it caused it to align closer with the 2% budget. But we didn't fund the 2% budget goals. We funded the
the CARES Act budget that I laid out last week. So the CARES Act funding in FY '21 is planned to be around $1 million transferred from FY '20. We're also forecasting the FEMA reimbursement for COVID-19. Then we stripped out the usage of fund balance in FY '21. So in the flat budget, we were using $159,000. So that's now down to zero. So we don't expect to use any fund balance in FY '21. We did some further cuts to the CIP to enable that goal of not having to use fund balance in '21 and really protect our financial position for the worst case scenario of a real estate market crash. And then we have the FEMA reimbursable expenditures totaling roughly $38.6 thousand. And then the registrar's deputy, moving them from a less than half-time equivalent to a full-time equivalent. The cost of $42,000 for that. Then I did the correction, I think I mentioned this last week as well, where I had the project manager position in the flat budget that needs to come out. Again, if phase 3 is approved, I'm going to be recommending that we put it back in there because there's just a lot of moving parts to everything happening with phase 3, especially with the city hall. That would be useful to have the part-time project manager to help us with that, not just the planning, the construction, but also the move from our current city hall to the new city hall facility. But that's stripped out of this current budget. There's a $28,000 now contribution to the fund balance. Not only did we not use $159,000 in fund balance, we're slated for a contribution to the fund balance now of $28,000 thanks to the cuts that we made. So we decreased the capital fund further by another $236,000 in contributions to really safeguard the city's financial position. And then again, for the schools budget resolution that we passed, an additional $49,000 for the schools. Here's the updated budget table. Again, you can compare this to my previous presentation, presentation 2, for the budget that had these tables for both the 2% model and the flat budget model. And you can look at these to compare. Really, the major differences from a revenue standpoint, you have the FEMA reimbursement, and then you have the CARES Act funding increase. We put that in the fund transfers section, so that represents a large increase from what was in the previous budgets, and then slightly less revenues for the capital budget revenue. So again, this is now a lot closer to the actual 2% budget than the flat budget, but that's because of the CARES Act funding. So almost all of these expenditure line items for the departments went up because of CARES Act spending. You'll see that in the spreadsheet. Each department has 1 to about 4 line items specifically for CARES Act spending if these budgets are approved, the FY '20 budget amendment 2 and the updated FY '21 budget. But again, you can see it's still a decrease from FY '20, a significant decrease in expenditures and revenues. Changes to the CIP, so not the operating budget. I'll go over the fleet strategy of using the enterprise centralized lease purchase strategy versus the existing decentralized lease purchase strategy. I'll cover that in the next slide. But we stripped out the BRE garage site demolition because that was, thank you, SC, for asking that last week, because it prompted me to go back into the budget and for the downtown. It's actually part of that already. So we remove it from here so that we don't double count it in 2 different areas. The Signal Hill Park Trails was pushed back 1 year, so that saved us $116,000. The goal is to do that in FY '22 if the real estate market is stable. Same thing with the IT security cameras across our facilities. That's a good security initiative that we want to do, but unfortunately, because of the uncertain financial position, that's another item that we did push back. So we plugged in the actual fleet numbers, the updated model. Chris spent a lot of time with Enterprise to get the best forecast for the next 10 years for what that looks like. Again, 21, we're not really starting it in 21, we're really starting the strategy in 22. And what these numbers show here for the central enterprise strategy, that includes all the existing lease purchase agreements that we have for our fleet, but we're
not doing any of the new decentralized, so it's just the existing as they wane off by FY '24 is the last year we're making payments on our existing decentralized lease purchase model. And you can see the enterprise, the numbers here. This includes a total of the fleet purchase price, cost, plus fuel, plus maintenance, right? Over the 10 years, what it costs with the centralized strategy, and then with the status quo strategy, what we're spending by year. And you can see the significant savings when you actually plug it into the budget from the solution. So not only are we getting, now, just as a reminder, we assumed that we were going to replace all of our fleet in this 10-year, right? Even with this model, it was just going to be done with the current model. Where with this model, we're replacing all the fleet. We're just doing it much quicker to capture all of the savings from maintenance and a fuel standpoint as well. So we're modernizing our fleet, and that causes us to save money. It's just cheaper to an enterprise to acquire, and then we also get the savings for fuel and for maintenance. So we're modernizing our fleet when we're able to, we're able to do that much quicker than this strategy, and we're saving a ton of money compared to buying all our fleet through the decentralized approach that you see here. I did the same thing for the water and sewer fund and stormwater fund, because you have fleet budgets. They're much smaller, of course, than the general fund, except you will see some outliers, some large vehicles that we can't get via enterprise, right? With the enterprise plan, we're getting kind of SUV, pickup truck and below. There's some large vehicles that we're just not going to be able to get through enterprise, so those costs are still in this number as well anytime we have to do that. But even from a water and sewer fund perspective, we're saving some money, and then from a stormwater perspective, we're saving money, which is always helpful when we talk about water and sewer rates and stormwater rates. If we can, doing these types of things, plus trying to find other creative ways to deal with our capital liabilities, are going to help reduce the pressure for rates to go higher. For the enterprise budget, the funds, the water and sewer, very easy. There's no change from the flat budget model for water and sewer. For stormwater and solid waste funds, we stripped out the rate increases. So across the city, there's no rate increases at all in FY21 to help our residents deal with the recession impacts related to COVID-19. In order to balance the budget for stormwater, we had to use fund balance. In stormwater, now, we do have a growing fund balance from stormwater over the last 3 years, so we have this flexibility. So we're actually spending $40,000 more in fund balance than what was in the flat budget for the stormwater. In the long run, again, we need to figure out what we're doing with this fund, mainly due to stream restoration, but I think Calvin, Allen, and I are going to be presenting something to you over the next few months, strategy for dealing with stream restoration without having to incur the large costs that we currently have planned. So that should help out with the stormwater fund. But until we fully flesh that out, we're still kind of in the same mode in terms of long-term strategy for reaching our DEQ mandates. And for solid waste, to balance the budget there, we cut the hazardous waste event line item. We cut $27,000 from that. However, in FY20, we're slated to spend $0 because the actual hazardous waste event days were canceled in the spring due to COVID-19. They're being pushed back now to July, which is the new fiscal year. So I'm requesting that you allow us to be able to FY21 budget amendment. When we get to that, we'll evaluate what our position is. But if we can, I would like to transfer some of that unspent hazardous waste line item money to FY21 to help offset some of the cuts that were the $27,000 cuts that we had to do in order to balance the budget with the no rate increase strategy in FY21. And again, as I mentioned last time, we eliminated the glass dumpster strategy to improve our recycling of glass. We pushed that back to FY22 instead of FY21, and then we did a further reduction for the additional dumpster line items with more kind of the internal dumpster usage. If that's feasible, we're going to have to keep everything tight, but that's kind of the approach to enable a balanced budget without increasing rates in FY21. And here's the water and sewer budget table. Again, no change from the flat budget, so this is exactly the same. And then for stormwater up here and solid waste, you can see that the actual total budgets went down because of the lack of a rate increase. And you can see with solid waste specifically, it's essentially a flat budget from FY20. And stormwater, we're using some fund balance to keep some of the pre-planned expenditures going. So those are the changes. Really, the major changes, again, are the CARES Act. So if you want to understand the FY20 budget amendment 2 and the FY21 budget changes since the flat budget, the number one starting point is looking at that CARES Act budget that I shared with you all last week. And then additionally for FY21, the change in fleet strategy, the additional funding for schools, the decreased use in fund balance. There's some more changes in FY21, but I covered all of the major changes in this presentation. And so really the goal is we have a lot on our plate for next week, the 16th. So if we can't get to a decision on the CARES Act budget, the FY20 budget number 2, FY21, then we're really going to have to convene on June 23rd to knock that out. Luckily, that was already on the calendar of meetings for the governing body that was adopted back in July or August for FY21. So we have a meeting scheduled already for June 23rd. So we're going to try to get as much done as we can on June 16th, at least if we can get the CARES Act budget approved, the FY20 budget amendment 2 approved. That will make them increase the clarity for FY21 in terms of where we're going. And then with both of these, with FY21 and with FY20 budget amendment 2, we're going to have to do appropriations requests. So for FY20 budget amendment 2, we're going to have to adjust the Q4, quarter 4 appropriations to make sure that we're covering the CARES Act and the increases with FEMA expenditures related to COVID-19. And then for the FY21, we have to do the appropriations for quarter 1 before July 1st for both the city and the schools. So that's what's going to be happening over the next couple of weeks. The finance department's already working on draft appropriations and budget ordinances based off of this data. But please let us know any changes that you're going to want to make over the next week or so we can work to get those numbers adjusted. And that is all I have.
Starting with the folks at home, Councilmember Machado, do you have any questions?
I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Councilmember Sendejas?
I don't have any questions, thank you.
Councilmember Cadet?
No questions.
Vice Mayor Banks?
No questions.
Councilmember Mensing? Councilmember Tremaine?
I have one for Laszlo. How much would it cost, since we have $28,000 going to reserves? How much would it cost to give enough raise for our employees so that they don't have a take-home pay reduction due to the increase in health insurance?
Okay, let me see. Let me see if I can find that information.
Like 0.25% or something like that, just so that they don't actually make less than they're making now.
Yeah, I can give you what the total cost is, and you can see if we have enough money.
Yeah, maybe and I love them all, maybe we can't do the directors, but maybe everybody under the directors. If we don't have, huh?
As if you don't love us?
We love you, but we just can't pay you how much we love you.
Let me find that out here.
Well, I know we're looking for I don't know what the numbers will look like, but we have that one small little bit of money that we might be able to put in a
So
difference.
the rising healthcare costs, well, from a city standpoint, it's $128,000, but I have to look at what it would be for an employee standpoint. Would you mind sending me an email reminder, and then I'm going to have Jennifer and Valerie do the analysis for what's the total cost across for our employees for their portion of the increase. I know what it is for the city, but I just realized that that's not the same number for employees, and then we can try to offset some of that if you'd like.
How much are we paying? Are we paying like 70, 75%?
Roughly, yeah.
Yeah.
It varies depending on the plan, but but yeah, it's a
percentage around that, but I can get you that updated information I can try to get you that information if that's a change you all want to make.
Well,
I
know that
And
we're a little.
please include the directors also
Yeah.
in the calculation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm not sure it can cover the full amount, but if it's applied to help pay that increase, then it would benefit everyone. So if we can do it, we can apply it for increased coverage. I'd have to figure out how to do that, but it would be an increased contribution from the city as a percentage. Would it be a one-time for FY21, or would you want to change the model in perpetuity?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Instead of giving the percent raise to the employees, is actually just paying the increase. I see. Actually, I probably would have made it easier if I'd have said it that way, but I
Yeah.
was.
Well, that way it wouldn't create a recurring cost.
Well, and then you would have people that would get a raise that don't take the insurance. So I guess that was my concern, was if we don't have that much money and we can't give raises, but maybe to at least hold harmless so that they don't come out with less take-home pay after health insurance. So, yeah, if you want to.
We could try to do like a healthcare bonus if you want, and that would be a one-time thing where we evaluate kind of how to allocate that $28,000 evenly across all employees who are paying health insurance to reduce what they're actually paying. So it would be, it wouldn't reduce what they're paying, but it would be kind of a check given to them to help offset those payments.
Well, just by what you said, maybe it might be better, and just to say we're gonna cover it, even though it won't affect their salary, but just with the thought that we'll cover the increase so that they're basically even where they're at now. They wouldn't actually take a decrease. That was my concern.
Yeah, and if we do that, again, the question would be a one-time increase in percentage, or would you want it in perpetuity? Like we just stick with that increased percentage of coverage that the city does.
Okay, I'll send you an email, because then we can look at kind of what the percentage is as it go from like 73 to 74. It might not be that much, or something like that.
Yeah. The reason why I had that 28,000 contribution to operating is I really don't know what's going to happen with our meals and sales. I'm using a best forecast, so that's why we cut capital, right? Because I was trying to eliminate both the usage of fund balance in FY21 and try to get an additional surplus cushion, just in case my projections are too low about how much revenues we use. So that's why I had that 28,000 put in there for the contribution to the operating fund. So that would just reduce our cushion if we end up having more of a loss in meals tax, sales tax, and vehicle than what we project.
Right. Well, at least it wouldn't be reoccurring, though, as Jeanette was saying, because it would just be our contribution to health insurance. It wouldn't actually permanently raise salaries. So, you wouldn't have that kind of worry going into 22.
Well, if we increase our percentage coverage, it would, right? Because each time a premium would go up, right? If we're committed to a certain percentage, it would. But there may be a way to structure it so it is one time.
Right.
If that's what the goal is. So that's why I wanted to kind of hear from you all that what your goal is. Is it you're looking for a permanent increase in our contribution, or just a one-time for FY21?
It is, I know that Blue Cross and Blue Shield's going up, I believe, 5%. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Is Kaiser also going up? I know some people on Kaiser.
I believe Kaiser's going up, but I don't know the percentage. That's a smaller, not a lot of people take advantage of Kaiser, but I can follow back up with what that
Right.
is. But Anthem is the biggest driver of their health insurance.
Right.
Let me see if I can.
Well, it might be one time only, because I know last year there was no increase, so they don't always seem to go in a steady line. They kind of wiggle, they kind of go around a different.
Last year Anthem was 0, but Kaiser did go up last year.
Right. All right.
This year, though, I think Anthem went up more than what Kaiser did.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay, is there anything else you want to add and have us vote on, Laszlo?
I know it's going to be a very long agenda on the 16th.
Okay.
Just prepare for that. We'll try to get through as much as we can. But again, we have that June 23rd date as a backup option, and then worst case, if we need to meet on June 30th to finalize appropriations and budgets and do that.
Okay. And again, everyone, please tune into the Facebook Live Virtual Town Hall tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Abstained? Motion carries. We're adjourned. Thank you very